Director del Instituto Italiano de Cultura, a Domitila Dardi y al estudio Formafantasma, que nos acompañan en esta jornada que vamos a dedicar al diseño italiano, ¿no?, en muchas de sus facetas. Yo creo que dentro de lo que es una jornada de este tipo, y voy a ser muy breve para dar la palabra a los invitados, es importante comenzar teniendo en cuenta y teniendo en mente un poco la diversidad y lo difuso del término del diseño, ¿no?, en tanto en cuanto afecta tanto a cuestiones técnicas como creativas, ¿no?, a la originalidad y lo que puede ser el dominio de una determinada producción. Y bueno, una naturaleza híbrida del diseño que yo creo que encaja bastante bien con esa transversalidad que aparece tantas veces mencionada en los planes de estudios universitarios en la actualidad, ¿no? Realmente el diseño se nutre de los materiales, de las tradiciones, de la cultura visual, de la industria, de la técnica, pero también de lo que puede ser la teoría o la historia, ¿no? Y además tiene unas conexiones con lo que puede ser el ámbito industrial y de esa forma también esa vuelta, ¿no?, ese revertir a la sociedad, que desde luego son muy interesantes, ¿no? En primer lugar, quería dar la palabra al señor Lilo Guarneri, sin cuyo impulso yo creo que esta actividad no habría tenido lugar, ¿no?, y que, como decía, en este momento es el director del Instituto Italiano de Cultura en funciones y quiere decirnos unas palabras, ¿no? Vuelvo a decir que le estamos muy agradecidos también por su presencia aquí con nosotros.
Bueno, yo, como siempre, seré muy breve. Solamente decirnos que es un privilegio estar aquí con ustedes. Yo he querido mucho esta actividad, y esta actividad se encaja dentro de dos jornadas que empezaron ayer en el Instituto Europeo de Design en Madrid, que es un punto de referencia para el desarrollo de la actividad de difusión de la promoción cultural de design italiano. Y es un privilegio, es algo que ha surgido con una idea con el profesor Carlos, que aquí agradezco mucho por su labor para toda esta actividad. Y sinceramente agradezco a todos ustedes y le digo que es una gran oportunidad hoy asistir, escuchar en dos momentos, hoy en la tarde, palabras que nos hablarán de lo que es, de un lado, con la profesora Domitila Dardi, que trabaja en el MAXI, que ustedes saben es uno de los puntos de referencia de la arquitectura y del arte moderna en Roma, entonces creo en el mundo, y de un colectivo de Andrea y Simone, que hacen parte de este colectivo de Formafantasma, que nos darán la parte actual de visión del design moderno. Es un privilegio tenerlos aquí. Hemos luchado mucho para tenerlos, porque desde cuando tuvieran la posibilidad de exponer y de adquirir o de donar al MoMA, entre los otros museos importantísimos, sus obras, la verdad que ellos se han disparado como cotaciones, como importancia, como requerimientos, están siempre andando por otro lado. Y es un ejemplo de un colectivo que no opera solamente en Italia, pero es un colectivo que vive, dos personas que hacen cosas maravillosas que nos contarán, que viven en Holanda, más que tiene una visión de un lado muy global, ¿no?, un pensamiento muy global, pero lo que he visto después muy relacionadas con las cosas del territorio, desde los materiales, ¿no? Estaba viendo aquí el cuidado con que se ha hecho este museo. Entonces creo que va a ser muy interesante para ustedes, y yo le pido que después de estas charlas aprovechen, se interroguen los ponentes con todos que, digamos, todas las dudas y las inquietudes que tengan. Nuestra intención como Instituto Italiano de Cultura, que es el organismo el oficial de la embajada que promociona la lengua y la cultura italiana en España, es mantener con ustedes una relación muy, muy fuerte para que siempre más tengan una relación muy fuerte con nuestro país. Entonces agradezco por estos pocos minutos y gracias aún. Bien.
Bueno, a continuación cedo la palabra a la profesora Domitila Dardi. Ella tiene una formación como historiadora del arte, una tesis de investigación, es doctora en teoría de la arquitectura y de hecho ha sido profesora de historia del diseño en la Facultad de Arquitectura de Ascoli Piceno, ¿no? Entre los años 2003 y 2007. ¿no? Como ha dicho el señor Lilo Guarneri, en la actualidad es curator de diseño en el MAXI de Roma y profesora también en el Instituto Europeo de Diseño. ¿no? Sus publicaciones las tendremos en la biblioteca, están solicitadas, alguna ha empezado a llegar, ¿no? Y se ha dedicado desde el principio de su trayectoria académica al diseño italiano, ¿no? De los años 50, a arquitectos diseñadores, ¿no? Muy representativos también como Achille Castiglioni, Eros Arinem o Gaetano Pesce, ¿no? En los últimos años. ¿no? De manera que vuelvo a reiterar mi agradecimiento y un poco para marcar o reincidir en la dinámica de lo que va a ser esta clase taller. Ellos están de acuerdo en que sea una clase proactiva, ¿no? dinámica y que intervengáis. ¿no? Vuelvo a insistir en que aunque sé que todos entendéis perfectamente el inglés, si alguien tiene más pudor a la hora de expresarse y quiere hacerlo en castellano, no hay ningún problema, ellos entienden lo que puede ser el castellano y tenemos una traductora que de manera consecutiva nos puede ayudar. ¿no? Lo importante, como decía el señor Lilo Guarneri, es que dinamicemos y aprovechemos al máximo la presencia tanto de Formafantasma como de Domitila. ¿no? De manera que le cedo la palabra y invito al resto de los ponentes a que se integren en esta mesa.
Good morning. So we try to speak in English because we don't speak Spanish, unfortunately. But however, if you have questions, as your professor said, don't be shy and let's talk together with the translation in Spanish. In some way, we will do. I just want to introduce you the duo Formafantasma, Simone Farresin and Andrea Trimarchi. We will speak about their work, but just a little introduction for saying, if you can put just the first slide. Okay. The difference between what we in general think about Italian design. This is a selection of icons, and you can see typical industrial design production, starting from, for example, the Arco lamp by the Castiglioni brothers. We have the coffee machine, the typical Italian coffee machine by Bialetti, the Vespa motorbike, the Fiat 500, and so on. And all these icons are linked from the fact that are industrial serial production. Most of them are designed by a single designer, and all of this particular way of design things has changed in the last few decades. And the result, the final part of this period, this chronological experience, is the Formafantasma work. That it's, in a certain sense, exactly the opposite, because they used to work in a team, so they don't want to express themselves in a singular way. they used to work in an international dimension, so there is no what we can call a language, a specific Italian language recognized as something produced in a specific country, but it's more a global and international approach. It's not just about industrial way of production, but we will show you that it's possible to design things and to think to other way of vision, other way of approaching the object that we need in our lifetime. And so let's start with your presentation. Starting maybe exactly from this, that you are not just a duo. You are a duo representing a team way of working.
Okay, I'm writing that.
I didn't want to do all the presentation because in the afternoon we have to say something new. Okay.
Hi, how are you? I'm very happy you guys came. Thank you to be here. And we are happy to be presenting our work here. And we decided to do that, starting with this slide, which is the name of the people who came over our studio since we opened, people who work with us, people that helped us in making our work happen. And we decided to do this, to start with this, then that usually the credits always goes at the end of the presentation, because we do believe that design is a matter of collaboration, and in a way, the fact that Mina and that we are working together exemplify that. You know, we don't believe in this, in staying only us at the forefront of our work, but possibly to credit the work of others also, which is something that in design world is not happening that much. And the name of our studio is Formafantasma, which means ghost shape or ghost form. And we decided to, for this name, because we want to underline how our work is not based on form or in a formal research in first place, but that the form is the consequences either of a material investigation or a conceptual investigation. We usually don't sit down at a table and think, okay, we have these clients or we have this project in mind, and then we start sketching shapes. We start from other things, and we will have the chance to show you better with 3 projects only. We decided to do it only a short selection of what we did in the last 5 years, how we work, basically. But since also our studio started only 5 years ago, we thought it was interesting. It might be interesting for you to know where we started, actually, who we are, and why we got interested in design. So I come from the northeast of Italy, from a village near Vicenza, which is a kind of a small city. It is full of fog, as you see, pretty boring. I hated growing up there. I couldn't stand it. And but the reason why the place is famous is actually for production of. There's a lot of productions of furniture there, and industrial production. But that's not how I got in contact with design, because actually my father was a farmer, so I wasn't related to that. But only when I moved to an art school when I was like 14 or 15, I've been introduced to design by my teachers there. So I got in contact with this idea of design quite early, and I became a design freak. And I started hanging posters of the Italian design masters and getting really freaky with that. And later on, I decided that it was time to move on, and I realized that, thank God, there's more than that in life. And but we decided to include this image of this poster of Enzo Mari, who is quite important. He's a pillar of Italian design. And he did this exhibition in a museum in Italy called La Triennale. It was called Il lavoro al centro, that means the work at the center. And we thought that was a fantastic title for an exhibition about design, to keep the work at the center, which is still, very relevant also in our work. And that's the reason why we decided to include this in the presentation.
May I say one thing? First of you, Andrea, that it's, I want to underline some differences between your way of coming to design and the traditional way in Italy, in Italian history of design. It's absolutely common that someone from the north goes to approach design. It's all the masters we saw in the last slide of the Italian design icons are from the northeast particularly, and it's very usual to consider Milan as the capital of Italian design, and I think in a certain sense the global capital of design. It is not so normal to have posters in his own room. So this is weird. This is strange. This is just Simone. But for all the rest, is absolutely normal. And
I have like Spice Girl like poster. No, absolutely not. And
a little bit uncommon is to come to design starting from the far south.
Yeah, indeed, my experience was completely different than Simone's one. While he was growing up in that horrible, boring place, I grew up in this beautiful, parts of Italy that is Sicily. So sea, sun, amazing. While he was going probably to dance on a discotheque, really contemporary music, I was doing actually the opposite. I was part of folkloristic group. That's something that is really common in the south of Italy. And no production is happening there, so no industrial production in the south. Actually, the only production that is happening in the south is the one of more related to folk craft, so ceramic, woodworking, really different again from the south. From the north. But as Simone, we decided both to go in Florence. It's a kind of middle place, from the south and the north. That is a more central region.
I guess. No. So.
Use mine.
This bottom thing is making us crazy. So, as Andrea was saying, we decided to move to Florence to study there at ISIA, which is one of the first schools which opened in Italy, actually the first, related to design. And there, we decided to go there because we were interested in radical design. So, radical design is something that developed in the 70s. And what we were interested about it is that the architects and designers were using this means as a way to discuss possible futures and scenarios and how to differently shape the world. It was a very polemic time. It was kind of developed after the turmoils of the end of the 60s. And but when we got there, it was actually the 90s, and the situation was completely different. So there wasn't anymore, I think, this critical component, and I think we found a situation which was completely different there.
Yeah, indeed. We are adding this slide because when we went to Florence to study, what we wanted to do actually is to rethink objects. So, for instance, to rethink the strobe room. While what we were asked all the time is only to reshape, for instance, the vacuum cleaner that you see on the left. And this is something that I think was for us a bit shocking, how this radical component is really also this new way of thinking that was really common in the 60s was completely deleted in the 90s, where just shaping was important.
The education changed a lot because if you consider that all the designers of the 60s went from an architectural education and you were in a new generation. Today in Italy, if you want to study as designer, you have to go to a specific school, and in general they are not inside an architectural university. So I think they had maybe more the idea to use design and objects to find a way to express their architectural ideas that is a little bit different as your position.
So at that moment in time, I think me and Andrea, we didn't met each other yet in that moment, and we started losing interest in design. We started thinking, okay, this is not for us. We're not interested in this. And then we met each other, and just via meeting each other, we started discussing life more than objects. And then via discussing life, we got in contact with objects again, and without even knowing, and we started collecting objects together, visiting exhibitions together. And we realized we were still interested in design. And especially when we were visiting the Milano Design Salone, we saw the exhibitions of Droog Design there, the Dutch collective, and the exhibition of Design Academy in Eindhoven, which is a Dutch design academy. And we started perceiving that a generation which was much closer to us in Holland, they were finding different ways of expressing their ideas, and we started relating to that more than what was happening in Italy. So we decided to send an application together, me and Andrea as a team, to apply at a master there, and then we moved to the Netherlands and we started studying 2 years master as a team. And in 2009, after the graduation, we opened our own design studio in Eindhoven, which was called Formafantasma.
Well, and this is a nice picture of us, and I think it's really an example on how we work. So it's everything fruit of a discussion, or I would say more a fight. This is like a really typical Italian expression, and believe me, this is a real, true pictures taken while we were fighting at the ECAL in Switzerland in front of, like 50 people probably. And this is like how we work. Everything is fruit of a discussion. We never draw. We never start from thinking about objects in terms of like really designing them. But most of all, we are starting from thinking, rethinking about objects, about process, about production.
Also, maybe we can say that you went in the Netherlands because there you find a new country, in a certain sense, a new cultural country, because the Design Academy is completely different from all the universities and educational center in Italy, because maybe they have more interest in give you the sense of what you can do with a vision than to realize copy of something that it's in our reality, in the real production. And in this sense, we can say that it's more close to art and the way of production of art than to the traditional design fields.
Well, there are contextual reasons why design developed differently in the Netherlands and in Italy. So Italy, design developed connected to production, while in the Netherlands there wasn't a very big tradition in producing furniture. And so the design field developed under the cultural ministry, while design is in Italy considered under, I think, the economic...
in Italy is under nobody except the producers.
Okay, but
this is reality.
But in the Netherlands, it is considered part of the cultural ministry, and designers developed their practice as a cultural expression, in a way. So there are different ways of approaching design, and in a way, I think what is interesting of what developed in the 90s in the Netherlands is that since the moment production started to become something more global, in a way thinking apart from that production is actually liberating and more creative than thinking connected to it. But this is a more complex topic that, I mean, we can discuss this later and move on maybe to actually what we do, because we are a conceptual and research-based practice with a focus on material and historical investigations, and the 3 projects we selected for today is an expression of this way of working, and we decided to present our work via some key elements, and one of these is looking back to look forward. Because we believe that often design is all the time looking for the new and not building on the existing knowledge. And sometimes I think looking back or looking what happened in history and in time might be an interesting, not only an inspiration, but an interesting resource of knowledge.
Yeah, also because I feel that we are, as a generation, we are really a forgetful generation. We are really used to get so many information, you know, because we are a virtual generation. Think about Pinterest, think about like all these platforms where you are all the time bombarded by images, but we don't know anymore how to contextualize. We don't know anymore if things comes from the past, things come from the present, and I think it's really important to have like a knowledge and to have consciousness about the past in order to create a better future.
To give you an example of what we mean with this, concrete is was apparently a Roman discovery, and in time this has been, a material that hasn't been investigated anymore, because what Romans didn't realize is that they would have placed steel in it. They could have had reinforced concrete. Then this discovery of concrete disappeared for a lot of centuries, and then suddenly during modernism somebody decided to insert steel in it and completely changed the way we construct building. But this is the proof or an example of how sometimes there are things that belongs to the past which might have a contemporary relevance. And Botanica of 2011 is exactly doing that, and it is a project which have been commissioned by Plart Foundation in Naples, which is a foundation dedicated to the restoration of plastics.
Another thing is interesting because your first work, but in general the major part of your works, are commissioned by institutions and the research centers, and not by producers and companies. So I want to underline, and then we will speak about it later.
So the owner of this foundation asked us if we could design for them a collection of pieces in plastic, because she is also a collector of objects in plastic. And at the beginning we weren't interested in the commission, because the first image we had in mind was the patch of plastic debris in the Atlantic Ocean. And but then we realized we were also victim of our own prejudice towards plastic materials, and we started doing an investigation into the history of these materials. And in particular, we focus on the early stages of when researchers and craftsmen, producers were looking into nature, into the natural world in search for plasticity, because we have to remember that in first place, plastic is a material quality. And then later a series of materials. So where we ended up is in these collections of vessels, which is I think constructed in a way to remove all the stereotypical images we have of plastic. Where plastic is perfect, the surfaces of our objects are imperfect. Where plastic is a material of industry, we use it more as a material of craft. And all the materials that you see in the pictures are coming from other resins from plants or animal derivatives. The way we investigate materials is all the time both intuitive investigation within the studio and also collecting knowledge. So what we did is looking in 18th and 19th century, more or less, and research ways of producing plastics from natural resources.
Something that I think when we started this investigation was amazing is to see that before the discovery of the oil, people were looking into the need to have material that was moldable, that was reproducible. But of course, oil was not there, so they need to find other way to source it. So we discovered amazing like plastic coming from dandelion, from milk, from poo of animals like the shellac that we use or other source. And that was really amazing, because even if it was something that was discovered during the 18th, 19th century, it's something that is like research at this moment in MIT, in America, and like in the major university. So this is like, yeah.
This is a bridge between the past and
Definitely.
the future. So
Yeah.
it's exactly what you were saying
Yeah,
before,
before,
the looking back for
Looking forward.
Okay.
So we collected some of these materials, and we will not explain you all the materials we investigated, but two of the one which we thought at a certain point they were the most interesting are shellac, which is excrements of insects that colonize trees in some parts of Indonesia and India. And these materials are still found in restoration because, of course, they were also used to lac wood, and then so there is still the needs of use some of these materials. And the other one is bois d'ourcy, which is a mixture of sawdust and animal blood or egg albumen, because both egg albumen and blood at high pressure and vapor, they polymerize and they bind fibers together. In terms of how we decided to formalize these objects, we decided to keep the very organic forms and very also decorative shapes, because we really want to refer both to craft in a way, or to this way more handmade way of finishing objects, and on the other side to recall with the organic forms the vegetal origins of the materials we implemented in the work. The work started and has been presented in 2011, and it became an ongoing investigation. And at a certain point, the Dutch collective Droog came to us and said, "We think your investigation is very interesting. Could we maybe help you to connect with a research place that could help you investigate even further the possible applications in the present of these materials?" So at that point, they connected us to the Wageningen University, which is the agricultural university in Amsterdam. And with them, we decided to research more both the shellac and the bois d'ourcy. The reason why we thought shellac was a particularly interesting material is because it is, as I said before, these insects suck the sap from a tree and sweat it out on a more refined form of polymer. So in a way, the insect is working as a little factory. So if on one side it might look crazy to think to have a cultivation of polymers of plastics, on the other side we draw this comparison with what is happening with silk, which is an industrial way of producing textile with the help of silkworms. So with the Wageningen University, we started in first place to test the qualities of the materials and understanding if we could farm the bugs further. Then the research was very complicated and time-consuming and economically complicated because the bugs live in Indonesia and India. But then what we did with them is understanding the possibilities of applying these materials in new technologies, as for instance 3D printing. So we tested the material on a 3D printer, and with the bois d'ourcy, instead, we tested it on an industrial press mold to understand if proteins could be applied as a binder for fibers, which we realized the university was already investigating, because in the production of agricultural products, there's a lot of waste in terms of proteins which could be applied for
Indeed,
materials.
like we also research in soya, in other kind of protein that comes more from farming more than farming from animals. So let's say that we both investigate the animal derivative and the vegetal one. That was really interesting. But what for me it's interesting of Botanica, let's say, of course, I mean, we like the object, but more what we discover, like researching into the project, was really the new physicality that you can give to plastic. You know, we are used to think about plastic in only one way. You know, it's either opaque or really shiny material with really bright color. Can we rethink about this, you know, in order to make object that looks like cheap, you know, and more valuable? I think there's nothing wrong about producing in plastic. The problem is how we perceive plastic. Well.
No, I don't.
Indeed, I think this is where we think a work like this might have a bridge towards industry. So when we did this work, we really thought it would have been interesting to work, for instance, with a company which apply plastics, for instance, to furniture in a very predominant way, but then maybe thinking with them if we could, instead of designing new products, designing different aesthetics for their plastics or how they apply it. Or, for instance, thinking how can we produce a plastic which is more long-lasting or that is aging in time better. But we knocked at the door of a few companies, but that didn't happen.
May I ask you something before passing to another projects? We know that Botanica is your work who has been accepted in one of the most important collection all around the world. I mean, MoMA, Victoria and Albert, Metropolitan Museums. So it's a very speculative project. But why, for you, exactly Botanica has this characteristic to be chosen in collections all around the world? Because we will see other projects and other works where the same speculative way of thinking, design, and the process, the research is equally present. So why exactly Botanica?
I think it is because it touches contemporary issues regarding how we perceive materials, but also how we produce. And it is formally challenging, and it questions one of the most important materials for design of the last century. So I think it touches these issues which are relevant, and then because of how it exemplify these problematics, I think it makes it
and
very
how
relevant.
it will be about plastic. It's an emergency for us. We
exactly.
should think about it.
I think also aesthetically there is something that is really no, I would not say challenging, it's not challenging, but different. I remember like a beautiful article that a writer wrote for The Guardian, and he said that the first time he saw the objects in Milan, he really felt completely weird because he couldn't understand if they were objects belonging to the now, to the past. There is kind of a really no age component.
It's eternal in a certain sense.
In a way, yes. You know, it looks
yeah.
from a tribe of from Amazon. You know, you can't really understand where these objects come from, and I think that is like the strength of that specific project.
It's out of the time.
Yeah, while, you know, like with other projects, I mean, we are just showing some today, you can definitely recognize like the Sicilian influence or the Dutch or more archetypical. There is not even the archetypical component in it. You know, they are completely out of time. Out of time, yeah.
Yes. Primitive and contemporary at the at the same time.
Indeed.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, as you might have understood by now, material investigations are very, very important for us, and another project that is doing that is the Natura Fossilium of 2014, which is, as always in our case, it always starts from a very private and intimate fascination. We always start from something that fascinates us personally, and then we take that further and understand why we are fascinated by that and which might be the relevance of that. So when we are in the studio, we always get to a point where we are okay, let's now go to holiday, we have enough of working. And we go to holiday, then we relax, and because we are relaxed, we start working again. And the last time that it happened was a few years ago when we were to the Etna volcano in Sicily, and we thought completely overwhelmed by the landscape there. And what we thought it was interesting is that when we arrived there, it is really a it is really an overwhelming experience because in one side.
So there was no the audio. Yeah. Okay. Great. Yeah.
It was a really overwhelming experience because on one side you have the perception of the force of nature, and on the other side you have a tourist visiting the location. So it is really about this clash between the nature that becomes entertainment for tourists, which is something that in the south of Italy is happening all the time. And for us that we are designers, instead what we saw in that location is actually a possibilities for production, because in a way when we look at the place, we don't connect it to entertainment, but to as I said, to production. For us, the volcano is a mine, but with no miners. Is nature which is excavating itself and expose materials. So this is what happening in the surroundings of the volcano after the explosion. So the villages and the streets get completely covered with black matter. Then people, clean it away, and then life starts again. So starting from this as a starting point, we started thinking, okay, what can we do with this? Can a production start happening around this? And then we investigated already what production is doing there, and on the other side, what is possible, what might be possible. So we found this image of the 70s, which we thought was very interesting because it's the ground zero of production. It's like a man which is collecting lava from the location and molding it into a matrix. So inspired by this image, we also got in contact with the volcanologist center there. So as we did with Botanica, we took two parallel ways of investigating the location. One is collecting actual data and informations and knowledge. And then on the other side, experimenting with the materials by ourselves in a lab in Eindhoven. And first we started on a metal foundry. We refused the lava, and then when we saw that with the quick cooling time the material was getting closer to glass than to actual stone, we moved to Venice and worked on a glass factory there, where we experimented with the materials on a very intuitive way, and we tried to control it as a glass. Of course, this is a very basic way of producing glass. Glass is a highly engineered product. There is only, I think, a few places where sand is still collected, and it is transformed into pure glass. So all the glass of Europe, for instance, it sources from sand in Belgium. So this is all the time what we are interested in understanding, for instance, the relationship that there is in design as a final outcome, and where the main material comes from. We think we are interested in this relationship. So in this image, for instance, you see in a way where we started, so very rough samples, and the final outcome where we started to control much more the material itself. Also, in the way we finalize objects, we always try to implement in the final form suggestions of where we started. So all the objects that we designed have in the final outcome raw rock, so that you could almost see where we started and where we're going to end formally.
I think these two are kind of, I think these two images like this one and this one are kind of good to have it together, because are an example on how we work, because in this image you can see the designed piece, so how we decided to draw the vase. But this is the only one that we got like with this shape. You know, it was almost impossible to force like lava and blowing it like to make this perfect shape. All the other pieces that we did in the collection, they were kind of a lot in terms of vase. They were completely organic, but I mean, in this case, you need to accept what comes from it. While, you know, working more and more with the material, we understood how, for instance, it was much more better to cast it, so to make like sheets out of it, as in this case. So we did a series of boxes that were like working with these sheets coming from lava.
In the collection, we also, because this is also how we work. When we work with an idea, we build a series of objects around it, so it becomes a collection. And for instance, in it, we decided to implement also a glass mirror made with obsidian. The reason why I want to include obsidian is because obsidian is what you find, it's a stone that you find in nature, which is a lavic glass, which is exactly what we did reversed in the workshops. So we basically reversed what is already happening in nature. On the other side, we also work with local producers there. They use basalt rock for a series of stools and coffee tables. And
yeah, I think also this is like a small table. I think also this object is really an example of how we work. On the left, you can see a lava mine in Sicily. And as you see, it's built in layer, of course, in century. Like every eruption, there is a new layer coming. And as you can see on the left, yeah, on my left, you can see that there is like a more compact part and a more airy one on top, because of course it's about compression of Earth in millennia or in century. And as you can see on the right, the objects that we did, like the small table, is it's an example on the same things. So on the bottom part, you can see an old eruption. Actually, that is an eruption from the 15th century. And more you go up in the table, more you can see a fresher lava. So, for instance, the one on top is an eruption from the 21st century. So I think it's around 1950.
so the way we work, it is really like intuitive in a way, and then we started building almost like a wall of informations where you have technical informations, visual informations, and then suddenly this gets formalized into a series of objects. And in this particular project, we also implemented two textiles. The one that you see hanging is a mixture of cotton and basalt fiber, because from lava you can also produce some fibers which are usually applied as a substitute to carbon fiber and glass fiber. But we didn't use it for its technical component, but more almost as an expressive material. And visually, the way we decided to build the iconography of the piece is mixing mythological reference of the volcano together with a microscopical view of a fragment of lava we collected when we were there, and it was an explosion.
Have you said that this was a private collection commitment? Mm-hmm. Because it's important for me to underline that in the past, all the icons that we saw before were in companies where it was possible to make a research on materials, for example. If we think about 60s, 50s, for example, about plastics, there was a lot of speculation and research about materials, about polymers, and so on. Now it is not so easy to do that. Yes, different time, but it's a sign of the time that a private gallery could commission a work like that, directed to a public of private collectors and.
But indeed, like this doesn't mean that it will stay on this stage or this kind of more private, like limited edition piece. For instance, now we are working for a new project for let's say more a company, and most probably we are gonna work in developing further the glass coming from lava, because I think there is a huge potential in it because of its aesthetic. You know, you can find this kind of really dark black glass. Just to add, black is something that you can't achieve in glass. Most of the time when you see black glass, you always see a purple part in it, because it's a color glass. While this glass is completely dark, and it can be also transparent. So it's really an amazing material to work with. And that's something that we are looking forward, when we can think about something we do in research in our studio, and we can bring it back to the world. And that's something we are working now in our second phase of the studio.
Yes, and I don't know if it's a pity or what else, but it's a little bit strange to think that today in our panorama we don't have industries and companies able to follow you in a project like that. Because if we think in the past, for example, in the 50s, Mr. Olivetti paid Ettore Sozzas for something like 1 year to go all around the world just to see things, just to see how people in the world used to work and used to live. It was just an exploration and research trip that could bring something to his industry, or just to feed this big author that actually in reality brought back to the company all this experience. But today it's something like an
but probably in Italy
dream.
It's something like this, because it's still happening. It's still happening. Come si dice meno? Less, but it's happening.
Okay. We hope so.
I think there are some
hope
companies
so.
that are doing that, but maybe they're not in the furniture industry.
Not in the furniture, for sure.
They're not in the furniture industry. The cosmetic industry is investing a lot of money, maybe not on a cultural level, but in investigations into materials. Well, we all know Apple, it's doing that less, but it was a great company. But what I wanted to say regarding the materials, because I don't think the point of this investigation is really on how the glass look, because I think glass is an engineered material. We cannot compete on that, but I think it is more in the relationship you might have between locality and production. So if you think in a scale of efficiency, for instance, also in the investigation we did with plastic, we spoke with a lot of experts with plastics, and they were saying on a global scale, this doesn't make sense at all, because we can produce, and he gave me an example, a plastic cap from mayonnaise, we can be open for 1 million times. And I said, well, I think if you open 100 times is enough, because nobody would need to open a plastic cap for mayonnaise 1 million times. But more than that is the fact that when you think in terms of efficiency on a global scale, you will never reach the level of sustainability. What I mean to say is that we need to rethink production in terms of what might make sense in a specific place and be produced there. So I think this specific project don't make sense if we want to apply it on a global scale, but it makes sense only related to that specific locality. And that's why we are usually interested in designing in context. So most of the time we have been contacted by companies to produce objects for them, furniture companies or lighting companies, and they all the time ask us if we can design something for them, but they don't give us any kind of framework most of the time, or they are looking for working with us as authors that work within our studio, and they go to them with a product. But this is often what we are not really interested. And Modern Tradition, which is a project of 2009, it's actually our graduation project, is exactly shows how when you work on a context, you can take very different approaches with it. This project takes place again in Sicily because we were interested in working with craft. We had a very naive and romantic idea about craft. So we went to Sicily, and in this small village, which is a sort of craft utopia or a craft nightmare, depending on how you look at it. But it's an entire village which works only with craft, with ceramic. So you go there, and you also find out that UNESCO protected the city, and they gave them a document on how to produce the perfect ceramic of the town. And even the architecture of the city has been completely covered with ceramic tiles, and actually I think the city is looking more like a Spanish city than an Italian one. So they kind of they made up a tradition basically. But what we thought was interesting is that speaking with the craftsmen there, they were all the time speaking about their role as a way of protecting a local culture. This is like, our role is to repeat the past, because in such a way we protect our own culture. And then we found out that one of the most, well, we knew that, but we found the reason behind it. There is a vase, which is considered very Sicilian, with the face of an African. And then you go around Sicily, you see in the balconies these faces of black people with plants coming out of the head. And we started questioning, why is this happening? So you see the image of the black thing on top is a vase with the face of an African. And we thought it was completely grotesque. So we started wondering, why is this here? And then speaking with the craftsman, he says, well, actually that reference to the medieval Moor invasion that, like, in Spain you also had. And then, but then we also find out that Majolica has been imported by African Arabs during that invasion. So the tradition of Majolica started in Europe, first in the southern region of Europe, and then has been exported also in other countries, and for instance in the Netherlands and so on. And we thought it was interesting how a craftsman there says, okay, we are protecting local culture, actually reproducing a piece, which is actually a manifestation of the fact that a dramatic invasion or the influence of another culture had in those areas. And then we connected this to the contemporary issues of migration flows, because there is this island in Sicily, which is called Lampedusa, where daily there are migrants from north of Africa coming and as refugees. And we think there is a parallel between the not wanting, the not accepting of migration flows in Europe with this attitude that craftsmen have in not wanting to change. And then here is the moment where you can decide if you want to design in context, or you just, as a designer, design something in your own studio and you treat craft as a form of production. So we could have decided to design whatever and then go there and say, like, could you produce it for me? Or accept that these objects in this context has a symbolic connotation and work with a symbolic connotation.
And what was the reaction of craftsmen?
Craftsmen don't care. Craftsmen do their work most of the time, and they engage with, they see themselves as authors, and they see their work as on an expression point of view. An expression means from, I'm putting myself out in it, and there is not a collaboration with designers in that context. So they just perceive our questions, and I have to underline what we did afterwards. We didn't produce there.
Okay.
So it has been fed by this investigation, but we produced independently from the context.
Okay.
So we ended up doing these collections of vessels that we constructed it in the same way that the craftsmen built their tradition there. So I don't want to take the story too long, but there is a museum of town which has been built exactly on purpose to create a series of archetypical forms which the craftsmen could feed from. So we went there, we studied a few forms we thought was interesting for us, and then we overlaid with a portrait of an existing person, an existing refugee. So we substituted the element of grotesque of the first piece with an element of reality. And we strip it down completely in Majolica. Majolica is usually glazed and bright colors are on it. We completely removed that and we kept it almost like a naked body. And we layered with elements that you can see that you can almost detach from it. And we used textiles and ceramic and photography. And the textile ribbons that holds the pieces together are reporting titles of or informations coming from newspapers we collected while we were building the work, which were referring on how Italians and Europeans were dealing with the issues of migration flows, and ceramic tiles with informations or references to the descriptions, for instance, of Palermo, which is a famous Sicilian city, which was a Arab emirate during medieval time. And we just layered these datas or informations, but without adding any sort of judgment in it. We just made them coming together.
Okay, and do you think there is a depth in this work to conceptual art?
Okay, so these are issues that usually has been discussed in contemporary art and not in design, but it is also because of, a long discussion also on international style and how modernism deal with craft and production and so on. But we think personally that there is a reason why these issues are to be discussed in design, and it's simply because objects are not solving only functional purposes as these folk objects are representing. You don't buy that piece to only hold liquids or flowers, but you buy it for a different reason. And to tell you the truth, there has been a lot of discussion about emotional design, this emotional component, which we kind of hate that expression. We find it a bit like, I don't know, repulsive for some reason. But I think that discussion was leading towards this direction, and is recognition that objects are more than functional tools. And this work is going in that direction. But I also want to underline that we are doing this within the craft world, and we are not doing it in the industry.
Well, but with the industry, it's even feeding more, In the moment, like, companies take the decision to go and produce in China, with everything that is, like, happening there, like with underage work and all these kind of things, I think, of course, a political component must be arise. So, for me, like, it's the political component in design must be addressed, for sure.
So I guess we are at the end of our short presentation for today, because we would like to open for a possible discussion. And then the last question is, like, what are we looking for? What are we interested in? What are we looking for next? Because as you saw so far, our work, despite this is only a selection, has been more like an independent investigation, and we had less to do with the industry in a way. And we are looking forward that collaboration. But exactly what we're looking for is a collaboration, and to find somebody which is not asking only to design a product and possibly not fit that system. Not because it's bad to design a product, there's nothing wrong with that, but we just don't want to work. If we want to work with a company, then we want to collaborate with them. We don't want to stay in our own studio, because then if we have to work in there, then we can do the work we are doing already.
One of the most horrible email you can receive is when a company asks you just to send a drawing. This is not how it should be. When you work with a company, you should be involved in how they produce, how they distribute, which material they use. If you can change even one of these parameters, you already made a small revolution. So I think this is something that we are looking for. And we are starting to get into that request, but it takes a bit of time. And I think you, as a new generation, us as a new generation, must be acknowledge that, and we must ask. We should never be into the position of sending a drawing. I think that's not how it should be.
So maybe you are looking for a more consciousness in design.
Definitely ethics, in all sense, yeah.
There is, for instance, one of the biggest topics that I think should be addressed is transparency. So we know who designed the product, but often we don't know where the product has been produced, how it has been produced, and under which conditions. This is not acceptable. I don't care. Who cares who designed something if you cannot know what is behind it? And I think, for instance, the fashion industry is realizing that more from the marketing point of view. But I think the furniture industry is totally not implementing that. But this doesn't mean that the furniture industry is producing badly. They just don't care to communicate that in their relationship with the user. So as designers, we might be doing that. So for instance, if we are asked from a furniture company that work with wood, the first questions we are going to ask them is, where is your wood coming from? And most of the time they say, like, from a shop or from a dealer and that is not acceptable. We need to know and to design based on this kind of information. And we hope possibly that in the future we'll be able to do that. Thank you.
So let's shoot questions.
Puede utilizar el español, el castellano o el inglés, como prefiere. Eventualmente, Alessandra,
Vale, buenos días. Quería preguntar...
Perdón un momento, siempre que queréis formular una pregunta, por favor levantéis la mano y os acercamos el micrófono porque es necesario para las grabaciones que se están haciendo.
Quería preguntar primero si bajáis, o sea, si trabajáis bajo pedido y en segundo caso, si lo hacéis así, si lo hacéis mucho más cómodo cuando os proponen un tema o cuando camináis y de repente os encontráis con un tema como puede ser el caso del volcán.
Yeah, okay.
All the works we presented are commission works. So the Botanica was a foundation, so an institution, not a company. The Natura Fusina was a design gallery. And Molding Tradition, in this case, it was our graduation, but then it became a gallery work. And generally, we work based on commission. And it depends, again, also design needs to be read in context, so it depends from project to project. But how we work usually is to, depending on the commission, is to start from a discussion between each other. Then to be really technical on how we do it, there is a moment then, so at the beginning it's words, so it's a verbal discussion. Then there is images. Independently we collect images, and then there is a moment in which we realize that we are interested in the same issues and in the same way of approaching the work. Then there is a very difficult moment. There is a moment that you have to speak with your client. And we hate that part because it's in the moment we are in process, so we don't like to talk about our work in process. We can discuss what we are interested in, and we can ask questions, we can collect information, but to respond to with a final proposal, for us it is always not a pleasant moment. And then there is the moment in which we start making mock-ups, samples of materials, and then you really have this moment where you have images, texts, samples of materials, mock-ups, and it coagulates together. It's really like a distillation. We start that is like this, and then it goes like smaller.
I think what you see like in the final pictures is the 5% of the investigation. We throw away so much material, but not in terms of materiality, but really about research we did. Like with lava, we did so many other experiments that we couldn't, manage to do it in time, but they will lead probably in the future in something else. But let's say that we work in with commission. We don't like to have this blank page or like white page where we don't have a specific brief. This doesn't mean that we follow it. Like we didn't present today the project for Fendi, the fashion company, but they started to they contacted us to do a marketing project for them. They were reusing their material, their leather. And we did almost the opposite. So we didn't use their leather. We went almost against the way of producing it. And that, of course, has been a bit difficult to deal with the project, but at the end they were happy, we were happy. And let's say that in any case, it's about discussion with the companies.
It is always an action-reaction kind of process. So, for instance, recently we have been asked by a museum in Australia to do something, and it's something will happen in a lot of years. And then they were really open. They said, like, well, we would like to, we are still really in the early stages of the discussion, but they mentioned something about the economy in Australia, and then we immediately started thinking, okay, we can react to that. So there is always something that is contextual on the way we approach projects.
Vale, yo quería preguntar acerca de cuánto tiempo, what's the gap in time for each of these projects, because at school we're talking a lot of time about how in our profession we have to make the projects in times that getting every time shorter, and we can make this kind of investigations about the material and about the historic bit behind any of these creative process.
Well, I think first of all you need to kill your darling. We like this expression. So if they say that you should take shorter, take longer. So all the time react on that. I think every project needs its own time. I would say now that we are like a more grown-up studio, that we have a bit of structure, we can deal with 3-4 projects per year. But of course, like project with even more. With a project like the lava, it's a physiological time. So that project started, I think, 4 years ago. It was 2-year time to just ask for money, for public fund, like private funding. You know, that actually the major part of the project was about looking for money because it was an expensive project. And in that sense, the project was financed the 30% by a Dutch fund, so like a public fund, and the 70%, no less, but 30%. No,
it was just presentation.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, let's say 20, and the 80% was private. No, the gallery was 20%. 20% public and 60%.
We did a private Kickstarter.
Yeah. So the collector put money in advance. Yeah, of course. Yeah, they got a piece at the end, but without knowing what to take. They could have taken just a piece of rock.
But,
really.
But I think there is a difference depending on the work.
Yeah.
So of course, when we have a client that comes and says, like, we would like to do this, and that is the deadline. Well, you work within the deadline. So it is true that you need to work quite quickly.
Yeah.
But it also depends. You know, these works are really a way for us to develop our own way of working, so we don't compromise this kind of projects. So it really depends on your commission, because if we, like yesterday we got an email from a project and it said like it is for September, and then you discuss with your client and then you decide what you can do within that span of time, and then maybe that is a more commercial project that helps you run your studio, and then you decide, you know, ethically and creatively and economically what you can do within that span of time. But this is an ability you grow up in time in dealing with that.
Yeah, I mean, I remember like as soon as we opened the studio, we were able to kind of deal with one project per time. Now really it's a bit crazy sometimes how we need to, you know, work in 5 projects in one time.
However, your next project should be finished in 1 year maximum.
Yeah, indeed.
Our project.
Yeah, well, I hope so.
It's 1 year, no?
Yeah, it's more than 1
year.
It's more than one.
More than one.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's it should have because
But
we are working on a project where she's creating it.
Yes, I think in general 1 year it's a good time to develop a project.
Yeah, but I would say that this is like an advice. If you can, of course. I would say that you need to set up your priority. So if you think you need more time to work on a project, especially if it's an important project, you can, of course, postpone it. Especially at the beginning of your career. Don't compromise their work because of schedule, I think. If you can. Yeah, of course.
A mí me gustaría saber de qué manera os influye a vosotros en vuestros diseños la arquitectura y al contrario, qué le podéis aportar.
Your next project is a little bit about architecture.
So our interest is on a different scale than architecture, of course. It's a difficult question because in the next project we will present, we have been influenced by the architecture, but to tell you the truth, we need more time to think about it. Like our work is often not not about spaces. Despite we present work in space, and we work within installations, but it is abstracted from that often, I would say. But I would need just more time to think about it. I never thought about personally our work in relation with, or consciously in relationship with architecture.
For instance, we don't do interior design, so that it's in a way a connection between design and architecture. So I would say that at the moment we don't think too much about.
We are thinking I did more and more.
Yeah.
It's strange your question in a way, because it's coming in a moment we are starting to get more interested in architecture and thinking about interior design and how people interact with space. But it's not something we investigated or we thought about on a consistent level.
But Simone, you are working, for example, on volumes, on proportions, on what a solid could react to light. I think this is very close to architecture.
But as I said, not consciously. You know, it's not. I wouldn't
the scale
make
is
it
different.
a priority in our work.
Yeah, the scale is different, and I think sometimes good architect can be a good designer, and the opposite. Well, you know, like in the 60s, in the 70s, we had great designer. They were architect, but because they couldn't build architecture, they had to do design. I'm talking about like the biggest Italian designer.
I think he's thinking about Remco as being a designer.
No, well, I'm not speaking about him actually. Probably
It
more
was just a
Zaha
joke.
did, you know. If you think about Zaha did when she designed like objects, I can't really see a designer perspective into that. But I mean, for sure, like in the 70s, the 60s, the 70s, like designers were architects were doing design because they were not able to do anything in Italy, to create architecture in Italy.
I can understand that this is your own position, because you are talking about architects that are so formalistic in their way of approaching design. If you think, yes, Zaha is absolutely her shape in objects and in her vision of architecture. So, but I think that if you consider the process, the way of looking at how we belongs to spaces, how we have a reaction with the light, volumes, and solids, I think that it could be something very close to your work.
It could be.
In an abstract sense, and not in a literal sense.
It scares me a bit, you know, like, to go in such big scale, it's a bit scary for me. But we are not architects, so, you know, it's...
no, this is evident.
Me gustaría saber qué piensan ellos acerca de cómo puede afectar a la sociedad de hoy día la percepción del arte y del diseño por culpa de, o cómo afectan las redes sociales a la sociedad en ese sentido.
Sorry, your question was quite elaborated, so I'm trying to understand.
About the society, its influence in a good or bad way about Pinterest, Instagram, and the relation about how it can be good for the society in terms of perception of design or arts.
Yeah.
Good question for two Instagram addicted.
We got it recently. Well, okay. So I think I would always start from the same starting point. Technologies are always tools, and as such, they can be great and it can be terrible. You know, it is always like that. There is always somebody when there is a new technology coming up, which would be so naive. They would say like, this technology is going to save the world. It is always like that. I still remember when you probably were much younger than me, when the internet came up, and then there was a lot of theorists like saying this is the perfect democratic tools. This is the place where we can be whoever we want. It is about privacy. And then we are in a moment where we know that it's exactly the opposite. It is, we are even more ourselves online than what we are in reality. So it is crazy to see how there is always a moment where technology seems to save the world, and they are not doing that. But in thinking about design, I think there is an opportunity for our generation to put out design which doesn't need anymore, for instance, to be produced by a company. So the relationship we have now with production is completely different. And I actually think it is an advantage. On the other side, it is also about this over-pollution of visual informations. And then in that respect, you need design again to help redefine what is relevant and non-relevant information. There you see indeed the coming up of a lot of designers working with information design, which is a brilliant new way of making data understandable and making this complexity understandable. What Andrea was referring also at the beginning was interesting, because on the other side it is both an advantage and a disadvantage that you have, for instance, with Pinterest, this sort of unhierarchical structure. You know, you have everything from different ages can come together. There's just a few tags on it. You don't know a lot about it, and everything is on the same level, which is in a way dangerous and in a way hyper ignorant, and in the same way it is hyper liberating. So in a way I think we can source these images and using them as tools. On the other side, you need to have the right tools to understand these images. So it is a very complex issue, but I see as frustrating and as liberating at the same time.
Yeah, I would say more as a possibility than a problematics. Yeah.
May I add a question to this? What do you think about e-commerce? Because a lot of designers of the new generation use e-commerce, e-shop in their website with an alternative market to the real market.
As a consumer, I think it's one of the most frustrating things ever. Like we order like a sofa.
No, because it's bad. Not because we think it's a bad experience. At this moment, it's still very bad.
I mean, I would love it. I mean. I would love it, but still, it's really primitive, you know.
But it's a real alternative in retailing products.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. I think it's like, again, for the furniture industry, it is crazy how still you cannot buy certain things. Like, for instance, let's think of a company like Vitra. Do you need to see the IM chair for real? Or you can go in a shop, you see it, and then you can buy it online. You know what I mean?
I am from another generation. I need to touch things.
Yeah, but
no, for me,
you know, but like it's also true that we are getting.
No, it's.
But the physical object will never disappear. I mean, if you think about IKEA, what the IKEA is doing recently is to open shops, small shop within the city. This is like telling you how it's important to have physical object, because you need to have again object. Physical. I mean, you need to experience it in a way or the other.
Would you use such?
Totally. Yes, totally. But I give you, like, for instance, in which way it makes sense to use it. Like, for instance, when you are already using a product and you know it already, why do they need to ship it on a place and then got stored and then shipped to another when you can just directly order it?
Yes, but you need a vitrine, something when you can...
Exactly, but then you can think about that, you know what I mean? But we are doing like a hypothetical discourse on the commerce in general. So for instance, if you get used to a perfume, for instance, do you need to go into the shop to buy it, or could you just order it and then it gets shipped to your place?
Yes, but in a certain sense, you use a commercial net, the traditional commercial net, to approach for the first time the product,
exactly.
And then you. Yes, this is a little bit unfair if you consider it
Why do you think
unfair to the traditional commercial shop. I mean that they invest so much to open their shops and to maintain them, and you use their vitrines just to.
It's been always like this.
Yeah, but there is the need of cooperation.
It's about consciousness. At the same time of your positions in design things. So I think that it could be an alternative if you really have another channel of market. But if you use the traditional channel, I think it's a little bit unfair to this traditional channel.
Yes, but for instance, I see more and more like designers, and you can have like, I can tell you like Michael Anastasiades, there are a lot of designers now, they are starting to produce and sell it directly. You know, why shall I divide? I mean, like when we sell sometimes object to from shops, we need to give them the 70% of. No, well, it depends. Could be. Can be like even 50 for me. It's a lot, you know, when they didn't invest anything, you know, and they get just the profit in the pocket, you know. And sometimes I think you can have more visibility, you can access to more people than, you know, when you sell it in a physical shop. But it's really depending on, you know, if you're talking about industrial production, auto production, it's really.
I think you are pointing out in an important point, but it's just a matter of considering a transition time.
Yeah, we are in a transition period.
It is about understanding where it makes sense, where it doesn't make sense. You know, there are some products where it does make sense, and others that you need to experience it physically. It is just a transition moment. But I would like that this possibility would be taken in consideration much more.
Yes, and I think it's considering the transformation of the role of a designer in our society, because very often we need to be designer and producer, or curator and writer. I think that every single time we work in our reality, we should have a strategy, and sometimes we need to mix several positions.
Yeah, I mean, of course, you probably know, you know, like the furniture industry, when works with designer, give between the 3% and 5% of royalty on the selling price. I mean, this is like a shame. It's a completely without paying you any fee. And I mean, when you do this, you really want to change job, you know. Or
it's possible just if you have just a number of products, just such
but to make an icon, well, it's really difficult.
Yes, I know.
It's almost impossible. We know, like, really important designer, they get from royalty of a chair like 2,000 euro per year. How can you do that?
I think because the model has changed, but not the way of manage it.
Of course.
Okay.
About your experience. All of us were working in Maxi, and I think that could be good to tell us, if you can tell us in different way how was the experience in Maxi. You as a historic, there are like artists during exposition and during daily working. Could you?
I'll try.
Yes, I know that it's because I thought that we didn't speak about it, and for such kind of public can be interesting to hear something like this. I know that you are unprepared, but
no, it's not a problem. I think that as curator we have the responsibility to choose authors that could really be part of a collection, a national collection in this case. Actually, at the Maxi we don't have a design collection, but however, in general, I mean international museums, when you have a collection, you should be very, very careful in choosing authors, because in a certain sense you give them a place in the historical time. So for example, last year I had the opportunity to curate two different exhibitions. One is about a big master, Gaetano Pesce, And one was about 7 designers. Andrea and Simone were part of this group. And all of them were Italians who went abroad to find their own way of designing things. And the subtle link between the master and the new talents was that they went abroad to find a different way that is not just industrial production way. So in this sense, I think that the way Gaetano Pesce opened in the 70s and 80s was a different way of managing things in producing design. And in a certain sense, they are, I don't want to say sons of this way of looking at things, but they have a depth on what the masters did in the 60s and 70s. And I think that the responsibility of a museum is to give all the all the scene of this kind of cultural activities, and to think about what is important for a general public, and not on depending of a personal taste or point of view. It's evident that I'm more interested in what happened now in our contemporary period, to have a real debate with them, a real dialogue that it's not so easy to have with the masters of the past, because they have their own revolutionary position, and it's a little bit more difficult. But I think that it's important to give to the public the possibility of choosing what they want to follow.
I think I will respond to your question more saying which role might have a museum of contemporary art in accepting design within it, because, well, it's not a new thing to have design in a museum, but it's usually found more in applied art, where objects are collected. But I think the role that a discussion of contemporary design within a museum is in giving the chance to look at objects and production from a more speculative perspective. So, for instance, often I had this discussion where people says like, oh, I went in a museum and I found design, but I couldn't use the objects, and I don't see the point. And I'm like, well, you can use objects all the time. The reason why you have objects in a museum is that you should have a space for reflections and looking at objects from a different perspective. For instance, the connections that objects have with economy, with politics, with contemporary production, and questioning this system. So this is how I see how a museum should approach the existence of design in its spaces.
And I think it's very important to focus on the fact that a museum, it's not a showroom for a company.
Exactly.
So in the past, for example, we had a lot of cases when a company went to a museum just to loan spaces for his own business. This is completely out of mind for me. It's crazy. It's something that
ignorant is actually very ignorant.
Don't agree at all.
So many years ago, think about what happened to the Stedelijk in Amsterdam, that it's one of the most radical museums in the world, that received like an enormous quantity from a company, as you know, that's fantastic that a company give money to a museum because it needs money. They should, definitely. Yes. But I mean, after that, you know, they did like a huge exhibition about Marcel van der. That again, it's great, but the way, you know, the work
there was a conflict of interest, and then I think that it shouldn't happen within a museum, which is, and this is where design is still treated as a secondary of secondary importance. Yeah. So something like that could have never happened in the art world ever. but it could happen still in design.
Yeah.
So there is still a lot to do in building a discussion around design, and I think often minor institutions are doing a greater job than
the
bigger
big ones,
institutions, which have difficulties in managing this relationship.
And I think that design is like an iceberg. In general, we consider just the bottom of the shape, yes. And the challenge for a curator is to show to the public all that it's under the water, all the process, all the work that you have to do to go with a final product to the final user. That it's not so easy and not so an happy word. So it's yes, but
sometimes.
it's challenging because it's a history about humanity. It's a question of a relationship. Sometimes people doesn't know exactly the way of a thing are produced, and they are always based on human exchanges.
Okay, I have two questions, one general and one more specific. One general is, considering that you have been trained in an art school, basically, then you moved to Netherlands, what do you consider is the gap in the design education that you have to fill out after the school? What are the main issues in terms of knowledge and terms of tools that you right now you see is the main gap? And the second one is, how do you convince somebody that you are not doing architecture at all? You have explained that, but you are designers and not artists.
Yeah, clear. Regarding the first questions regarding the education, we are actually also now teaching at Design Academy Eindhoven, where we started. And actually, our training was first in Italy, where we did a industrial design education. And then the education in the Netherlands, because of the complexity that we explained before, it is actually an art education. It's an academy, exactly. It's not an art, it's an academy. Okay, so the education in design is very difficult. Very, very difficult. It is difficult because you never... I think there are some basic things that are not taught anymore. For instance, basic things like regarding forms, regarding colors. On the other side, there is also, like, because we live in a complex world, you need also to approach design from a complex perspective. And I think the way that we found in teaching, and also within the department, which is, we are not head of the department, is actually Issa Crawford, is the head of the department, is to start from a human perspective. So for instance, Design Academy found this, I find it a very beautiful way of naming the departments, because they all start from men and something. So it's men and well-being, men and mobility, men and living. And then they in the past, now they changed their name, but I thought it was wonderful because they had a master which was called I Am, which was a completely different perspective for design. And starting from that perspective, where the human is at the center, I still think it's almost an obvious perspective, because it's where design always, stood. But it is an interesting one, and I think it is still the best. Even if I think it is important to have at the beginning of your studies, if you're dealing with furniture or with architecture, to have this basic propedeutic years where you still have this experience with materials, with forms on a very hands-on and intuitive approach. We realize that, for instance, because now we're teaching at the master and the bachelor, and sometimes the bachelor, because they spend much more time with this very more intuitive approach, which is much more selfish in a way, and self-indulgent, they come to the later years, which they are ready to go out from themselves and look at the world with a much less self-indulgent perspective than the people at the master.
Yeah, for me, like something that is it's amazing from the education we did in Holland is really about empowering people. When you are students, most of the time you wait as somebody tell you what to do. The motto of the academy is it's up to you. So I think that's really a shift of perspective. It's not about what the teacher is saying, it's about what you think. And I think that's really the basic thing that you should teach in a school.
It's a bit frustrating as a student, but I think, for instance, what we realized, at least the way we found to teach is asking questions all the time. That's the only way that then the person in front of you has to find his own answers. And when we came to Design Academy, that's what happened at the beginning. And then we needed those questions. They ask, who do you want to be as a designer? How do you see the world? Why do you think this is relevant now? Why do you think you are thinking this in this moment? How do you see this? And these contextual questions instead of how are you going to produce it? How much is it going to cost? Which are also relevant questions. But sometimes within education, these questions should come at a later stage.
Yeah. It's a bit more barbarian, I think, at the beginning, but that's a good word, I think. And there is also the second. Oh, sorry.
May I say that I made a lot of interviews to designers with your own story. I mean, Italians that had the first education in Italian institutes and or academics and universities, and then went abroad. And all of you gave me the same answers, the same reaction, that they are very grateful to the first education in Italy because they had a big sense of what is a basic education. And a respect, for example, to historical issues. And I think this is very important. In a certain sense, could be very heavy. I mean that for an Italian designer, it's impossible to imagine to burn the icon of design as a Dutch made. It's something
Thinking
that
about Martin Bass with
obviously,
okay.
But I think it's impossible to think to this approach because it's something that it's really in our DNA to have a respect to the memory, a respect to the past. The past is something that you have to learn about it and then to transfer to the future.
Yeah, but this is the point. I mean, like, Holland is a forgetful country. I mean, they don't, also Italian, I mean, we also don't acknowledge our colonial time. But, I mean, Dutch people, they even don't remember, they have been one of the major colonies in the world,
I think he's being too heavy with the Dutch in this moment.
No, okay, but it's fine. But what I mean to say, it's an exaggeration. But for sure, there is not a knowledge. I mean, when you go in a Dutch city like Rotterdam, they are really easy in destroying building and rebuilding. There is something really nice and flexible on kind of being a bit barbarian, like destroying and rebuild. There's no kind of a collective memory, I feel. But probably you don't agree with me. But
well, I was just thinking that Rotterdam has been bombarded in the Second World War, and so.
But okay, let's not start with discussion. But of course,
no, but I know what
right.
you wanted to say. I understand your point. I don't remember anymore.
Artists or designers?
Oh, yes. So we truly believe we are designers. I think what we developed so far is an investigation into in understanding ourselves and our position. And but everything we are interested is in design-related issues. Then the outcome and the systems we are using, it is closer to the one of art, but I don't think we are behaving as artists. And we are not interested in being considered artists. I think also that there has been a discussion in the early stages when design started to be developed, where artists were asked to intervene in the dialogue with the machines and with the industrial production. So I think we came accustomed to divide the two worlds, but they were much closer in contact earlier. Also because art in the past were much more related to formal aspects. So the dialogue was also much more easy to be developed. And in this moment, I think a conceptual approach is more common in the art world and less in the design one. Maybe you want to add something?
I forgot what I wanted to say. No, well, no, I think you have been like, yeah, good. No, I'm thinking, I was saying something else, but I forgot about it. If I remember, I will tell you like in a while. I will concentrate again.
Quería preguntar, antes ha mencionado Fendi y bueno, después de ver el trabajo de Craftica que habéis realizado, quería saber cuál es la misión de una firma como de ropa, ¿por qué pide proyectos así? ¿Cuál es su objetivo? Entonces, now I'll try in English. So, after seeing these days, for example, how Jonathan Anderson have launched some pottery for Loewe, I've seen your Craftica work, and which is the point of such a fashion house to launch a project which at first don't have much to be related with clothing?
Maybe because they made a mistake.
Yeah, it might be.
Marketing. So Fendi was looking for, which is not necessarily bad, you know, but they want to be related to design for some reason, and I think they wanted to be working with design for marketing purposes. So they promote design, I guess, for marketing purposes. But I don't want to, let's say that I don't want to say that this is the only reason why they are doing that. This is how we got in contact. I mean, we got in contact with the marketing people of Fendi. But I don't, with this I'm not saying that they're not interested in design and in making this happen, because Silvia Venturini Fendi, which is at the head of the accessories part of Fendi, she's truly interested in design and in promoting younger talents. So she's also doing that apart from what she's doing with Fendi, the fashion house. But let's say that when they gave us this space, I think we used this opportunity to look at their materials and what they do with leather from a different perspective. So
I think there we could have gone into two directions. One was like the glorification of their skills, so of their craftsmen, of their production, or going a bit into the fashion system, understanding, you know, also the problematic involved with the production. And I think, you know, they didn't want that, you know, like, especially because it was a marketing, I would say, project. Of course, they wanted more to have a project was about the glorification of the firm. But that was fine also our approach. I mean, they at the end, they were really happy about the result. But of course, considering it was a marketing project, they wanted to have more a marketing approach for the project.
But it's a difficult, in a way it is a difficult question, because we are responding from our perspective, and maybe the perspective of the company is slightly different. We just got in dialogue with the marketing department, but I'm sure if this kind of, in the moment that the company decided to say, okay, I'm going to use this as a marketing tool, and then they could have, not necessarily are going to sell more handbags in doing this. So it might be that they're truly interested in promoting design.
But I think openings, experiences, cultural experiences, it's a really very common brand strategy in our world. So if you consider how many foundations we have in fashion design about art or design, so it's very common, and we can imagine that they are fascinated by the new talents, because maybe they consider they are a good investment for the future.
Yeah, I think it's like, strangely enough, we also feel it, that, you know, there is a big interest from the fashion world to the design. I think before was more towards art. Think about Prada Foundation, Max Mara Foundation. They are like all companies that were more interested in art, and now, strangely enough, they are being interested in design. Alexander McQueen, I can name a lot of it. You know, they are really looking into design as a discipline. But because I think at the moment design is more interesting than art, it's more relevant, and also it's really open up a lot. You know, like there are designers, they are working with biology, with medicine. What we consider design, it's not just related to industrial design. So I think it's a really exciting moment too for the discipline.
Unfortunately, they has changed the way they are interested in design. I mean that in the past, a lot of fashion designers try to design something in furniture or interior design, and it was a nightmare.
No, indeed, like a happy. They're not existing anymore. Fendi Casa, or you know, or they are existing, but they are whatever.
Not very interesting. Yes.
No.
Yes. Does the idea of not wanting your product to be perceived as belonging to a certain period of time, does it affect your design? Is it like an ongoing question that you have?
That remark that came about was connected to Botanica, and that was a on-purpose decision, because we started thinking that all objects has been designed by a question. There was like, what would have happened to these historical materials if oil would not have stepped in the production? And then we wanted to shape them in this almost retro future kind of way that you couldn't kind of point out where they're coming from, which are the materials, and that was a conscious decision. Conscious, I mean, that is something that we realize at a certain point, because the moment we formalize what we do, it is really like this ping pong between rational and intuitive process. It's also when you start to look at the materials and you're really like, well, they're not really leather, they're not really plastic, they're really not wood, and they have these textures which are kind of weird, and then the language start to come out of it. So we collect, for instance, images of backlight brushes, and then we had all these samples layered in a certain way, and they were reminding, for instance, at the beginning, because of the transparency some materials had, it reminded us some Tiffany glasses, and we hated it. We couldn't stand the samples. But then this is also something that is interesting to learn, you know, that you have these materials that you don't want to deal with it in a way, and then suddenly you start to understand them, if you know what I mean. Like you start to look at them and think, oh, but they remind me of this, and you shape your perspective towards it, and then you understand how you want to visualize them. It's almost like as when you, with food, that you have some salivating perspective into things, and it's like, oh, but it's looking like that, or reminds me of this, and I can work with that. It's like this.
But in general, I would say that, you know, like our approach, it's about archetypical design. So for us, when we approach a design, it's for sure looking into history. So we look into the roots, the ground zero of design. So if we need to design, as I think I said at the beginning, if we need to design a vacuum cleaner, we would never redesign a vacuum cleaner. We start from the strobe broom. So for us, it's.
But not saying that is better.
No, it's not
the root of.
It's our way of working. That's it. I'm not saying that one is better on the other.
This is the real radical way of thinking in design. I mean, to think about functions and not about the shape that could be the answer of functions.
But I mean, I guess that's what it belongs to all designers in a way, you know, to look into that, or at least in education. In education about design, this is something that is, I guess, you are invited in doing often, I hope.
I think that a lot of design actually in our market is not about functions, but it's just about shapes. So I mean that, for example, it's not a case when Ettore Sozza said about the launcher of the Eames. Charles Eames invented a new function not a new armchair.
Yeah, definitely.
That it's a
That's
new
interesting.
function of relaxing through an armchair. That is completely a different process, mental process, I mean.
Yeah, like for instance, you know, like we had one of our students is graduating now. She was really into rethink the refrigerator. And on rethink the refrigerator, she was interested in the property of material, and she got in contact with refrigerator. So the first thing she started to do is to look into material like ceramic or porcelain or marble. They have that ability of refreshing naturally without having any power in it, you know. And she discovered, for instance, that in the past, ceramic like terracotta was used for the ability of not only keeping fresh, but make it fresh water when is heated from sun. So if you have like a bottle in terracotta, you put it out, and because of the differences of can you help me on that? Yeah. But cools down a lot.
From this perspective, she's rethinking the way we conserve food. So, and I think that is the interesting approach. You know, when you think like, okay, we have a typology which is the fridge, but it can be, you know, in so many other different ways. But of course, you need to have good reasons why would you need to rethink the refrigerator. I mean, we are happy with that. But maybe it makes sense to rethink the way we conserve food, and then maybe the refrigerator is not the only answer. But I mean, yeah.
About that, I love a beautiful quote by Emory Lovins, who is an eco-activist in America and the States, who said, "In the future, we will need cold beers, but not refrigerators." So let's think about.
Yeah, but that's I think is a good approach.
But this is the what we were saying before about the human perspective.
Yes.
You know, we don't want to be moralists and say like, oh, we need to save energy. Let's drink cold beer.
Yes.
You know,
So
we still want to enjoy life, but let's enjoy scarcity or something like that.
Next title will be cold beers.
You were talking before how we are a virtual society and that we are receiving images from everywhere at every time. What is your advice for dealing with that? I mean, not letting that influence your work in a certain way, or maybe, you know, or how do you deal with it?
Wow, just use it. I mean, we use it a lot. I love it. You know, like as I said, like I'm a Pinterest, Instagram, Facebook, like addicted. You know, so absolutely. I mean, you need to enjoy the time we are living in. You need to have, but you need to question that. You know, you need to have knowledge on your datas.
But use it in an intelligent way.
Yeah,
I mean that. Yesterday we went in Madrid to the Thyssen-Bornemisza collection, and I was really impressed by Andrea because he saw such a level of details in the artwork that were there in the collection, and they were something that it's really a vision from a designer, from a creative person, and so use it in an intelligent way could be very, very challenging for the public. It's not so common.
No, it's true. So follow us in Instagram, please.
Like Instagram is a great tool, for instance, to take notes. You know, when you go around, or you can use it in a not necessarily on a social way, but on a more like for yourself, for instance, and. But I think in a way the banality of saying just use it is the perfect way to digest it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? Like, if you just refuse it, maybe you're not able to overcome this, and it's a tool. So it's.
I mean, it's amazing. You know, one time we had to go to a library to do research. Now you can do it like in your own house. It's amazing. Now we should just enjoy that. It's really about knowledge and understanding the tool. That's it.
Be conscious that this is not reality.
Oh, it's not, but it's an hyper-reality.
Maybe it is reality.
Yeah.
I think it is reality. I think it is reality. Why is that not reality?
Because it's, no, I think it's a philosophical question, too big, too big.
Okay, so I see that you have like your own style, your own way of thinking, but at this moment I find a bit difficult to tell by myself what is right, what is wrong, what's my style. How did you learn to develop your own opinion, your own criteria, your, I don't know.
We first of all, there's nothing wrong or right. Second, I think we are questioning too at the moment, all the time. I think that's a really healthy behavior you need to have. You need all the time question your profession and your way of thinking. It takes time. For us, we just say that, you know, these 5 years after we graduate, also the graduation time and the university we did and everything, was a gym for us, you know, to train our way of thinking, to train our aesthetic, to understand what we like or what we don't like. But it's about questioning all the time and reinventing yourself all the time, depending on the time you're living in. So. You will understand. You need to just, if I have to say, you need to use more your instinct than your brain. Yeah, that's a good suggestion. I would say.
But also, you don't have to think that because we are expressing some ideas or we know how to elaborate some ideas, we are we are finished in our investigation, or we are sure of, or we are telling you a truth. You know what I mean? Like, we are questioning every day what we do. We have insecurities. We don't sleep at night sometimes. We don't know if we're taking the right decision or the wrong one. We are hyper protective with what we do. And we are in tune, which is making that much easier. Actually, also much more difficult. But then you become much more detached from your own work in a way. Like it's 1, 2, and then there is the work there. And then that makes it, also for instance, the decision to have we don't have our own name in the name of the studio, because we didn't want to place ourselves there. There is a difference between ourselves, who we are, and our work. We have much more responsibility for our profession and what we are within that field than how we behave in person. Some people see our working like, I guess you're a vegetarian. I'm like, well, no, really. Why do you think that? And they have this feeling that for some reason we should be vegetarian. But that's a silly joke. But to say also that, yeah, there is a filter between yourself and your work. But for us, it's much easier because we are in two. And that this dialogue, this constant.
But believe me, you will never be sure about what you do. Never. But in the moment you will be sure, probably you should question if you are getting arrogant or something like that. So be aware of that.
Hi, I'd like to ask you, in a more global world, where we dress the same way, we eat the same things more and more often, how important is like local design? Because you said that you work with materials and related to history, and how important is a material related to a specific place, and how important is more important or less important, like local design in a more global world? That would be my question.
Okay, it depends also, you know, we would need to stay here and define what do we mean for local design and what do we mean for global design and all the rest. But I do think there is a sort of sense of responsibility for locality because we live in a global world. And for instance, it is maybe strange that when we moved to the Netherlands, we started using, for instance, Italy as a source of not even inspiration, but because actually we don't often like that
as
word.
A case study.
Exactly. So it seems natural sometimes, because we live in a global world, to be more careful with local necessities. Even politically, you know, or we can be much more sensitive for local issues because we have the chance to be globally connected. I think the necessities of local production, they should be implemented in design. And what the reference we did to locality when we were working on when we were explaining the Natura Fossilium and the lava project is because sometimes I think if we think about sustainability, sometimes we cannot think of efficiency on a global scale. So what I mean with that is that sometimes we often try to design things or to design approaches to materials, to technologies which are globally applicable, and I don't think that is all the time a solution. So what might be relevant locally in a context cannot be applied globally, and I think this difference should be taken in account. I don't know, to give you an example, you know, a certain production maybe, or a certain production system might be locally relevant because it can expand in that specific context, but globally it cannot be applicable. But I think often this kind of way of thinking is not really taken into account. I'm not sure I replied to your question.
Agradeceros a todos vuestra participación. Un aviso general. La Escuela de Arquitectura nos invita a una comida aquí en el aula, en la planta 1. Sabéis que el museo tiene planta -1, 0 y 1. Ahí es donde está nuestro catering. Lo digo porque a la salida de la puerta veréis que están montando otro aquí, ¿no? Pues el nuestro está en el aula 1, ¿de acuerdo? En la planta 1, perdón. Recordaros o animaros también a los que habéis participado en esta mesa que esta tarde la sesión de la escuela tendrá un matiz diferente, ¿no? Quiero decir, será más parecido también a lo que presentaron ayer en Madrid y quizá tengamos oportunidad de escuchar y de profundizar en otros proyectos del colectivo Formafantasma, ¿no? Bueno, agradecer a los ponentes esta sesión tan intensa y dinámica, y yo pediría un aplauso para ellos antes de continuar arriba.
Thank you for inviting us and congratulations for these students that are so active. Thank you.